Hello, and welcome to another episode of Curated Conversations, a podcast by the Grand Rapids African American Health Institute, where we talk all things health and wellness. My name is Ashley, and I will be your host for today's conversation. Today, I am joined by Kenneth. Can I call you Kenny?
You can.
Okay.
Let's just be real informal today. How about that?
Okay, good. I like it. I am joined by Kenny Henderson. Kenny, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So we have Kenny is a passionate community health advocate and kidney transplant recipient whose personal journey fuels his mission to educate others about chronic disease, prevention, and wellness. He currently serves as the Community Relations Coordinator for Gift of Life Michigan, helping to expand awareness around organ, eye, and tissue donation throughout West Michigan. With over 20 years of experience in community engagement and health education, Kenny focuses on building connections, sharing lived experiences, and empowering historically marginalized communities to take control of their health. I would just like to first start off, we've known each other for,
a long time.
Yeah, just a long time.
Yeah.
And I would like to say that it has been an absolute privilege to be able to watch your journey, that you share via social media.
Yeah, thank you.
On the sideline. I was secretly praying and rooting for you.
Yeah.
So it is a blessing and a privilege to be able to have this conversation with you. So thank you so much.
And it's a privilege to be here.
Yes, I know that's
you know what I mean.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
All right, so can you give us a brief description of the history of Gift of Life Michigan and the role you play in it?
Yeah, so Gift of Life was started in 1971 by 5 surgeons, and it's evolved. Like, that's over 50 years ago.
I know, right?
But 50 years ago is not really that long ago, right? But it has really evolved over the years as it pertains to technology and access and the program development. And my role as a community relations coordinator is to go out and connect with the community, whether that's going into the schools and educating students, organizations about organ and tissue and eye donation, getting people registered to be on the donor registry, giving them the information so that they can make an informed decision. But not only that, it's just going out in the community and finding opportunities to be creative, with getting the information out there in a non-traditional way.
So what are some examples of how you've had to get creative with?
Oh, I'm fairly new to the role. So I've got things in mind that I want to do. But I think one of the creative things that I've seen is, in the Detroit region, they're doing like these barbershop conversations.
Yeah.
And I know you're probably hearing that with a lot of organizations, even when it comes to like therapy and things of that nature. Barbershop conversations and having conversations with people about organ and tissue and eye donation, really kind of hitting on some of those things that are misconceptions or just people just don't know about, but also just really connecting in a way on a grassroots level.
Yeah.
So this in itself is creative,
right.
Just having conversation on a podcast is a way to get the word out there, So, but being new in the role, there's a lot of things that I have in mind that I want to do to really connect with people. Okay,
so I guess why does organ donorship matter specifically in the Black community? I mean, Black Americans suffer from chronic illness at a higher rate, increasing the need of organ transplant. But despite those needs, we still don't donate our organs.
Right.
So why does it matter, particularly in our community?
Yeah. So coming into this space, I'm learning that it's really like a dual thing when it comes to organ and tissue and eye donation, because you have on one end, you have one family grieving, and then you have another family excited about the life that was given, right? So there's probably this misconception about organ and tissue and eye donation because it involves death. So let's just acknowledge that right there. It involves death. Sometimes it involves tragedy. And so when you hear that and people experience that might have a negative connotation around it. So Gift of Life, we really try to promote the life that comes out of it, but still at the same time honoring those who have given that gift of life, if that makes sense. And so it really matters because it's a rare gift. It's I wouldn't be here without somebody going to the Secretary of State or signing up however they signed up on the donor registry to say, when I pass, you can use my organs to give somebody else life, And we have so many people who are, African Americans waiting on the list. One of the highest organs that people are in need of is the kidney.
Really?
Over 2,000 people in the state of Michigan, need a kidney. And that's mainly due to high blood pressure and diabetes, which we know is a trend in the African American community. And so a lot of it comes down to, just having overall knowledge of what, your family history is. If you've got a family history of high blood pressure, you need to be getting your blood pressure checked. You need to be talking to your doctor. If you have a history of diabetes in your family, you need to be talking to your doctor about check my A1C. You know what I mean? So some of these things are, they're not things that might be on our blood panels when we go into the doctor, and we might have to ask, can you check my A1C? There's a history of this in my family. So it's important to the African American community because we got those two risks against us, So, yeah, I mean, it's just important overall for just the aspect of life, giving people the opportunity to continue to live and make strides in the world and be successful and be with their families.
Yeah. I also think I like how you talked about, because I don't think it's something that we even think about of how the family is feeling that has already lost a loved one, and then now you want to come up in here and take their organs and, all of that. So in a sense, it's almost like they're being robbed twice because I'm already being robbed of them no longer being here and then also being robbed of their organs. But I don't think that we think about but this is a gift,
it's a gift.
It really is. So I think that if we do kind of change that mindset of you are literally gifting someone, the opportunity at life or, quality of life or whatever it is, then maybe that might change the way that we look at it.
I think too, coming into this position and learning about how one person can affect multiple people. So when a person passes and they're on the donor registry, they can save up to 8 lives with organs. Okay, over 75 lives with tissue. And tissue includes, it can be, nerves, ligaments, tendons, bone, and then we talked about the eyes too, the cornea, So it's so many ways that one person can change the lives of over 80 people, 90 people, 100 people, So I think that is not the lens that we come from. And then there's also a lot of misconceptions about religion. My religion doesn't allow it, but a lot of major religions support organ, tissue, and eye donation. So it's more so a personal conviction.
Yeah.
But, a lot of religions support it. So you may have times where people are like, okay, well, for me, it was, we don't give because it messes up your body for viewing. Okay, so I was told that when I was coming up, we don't give, organs because that's going to make the person look disfigured and we want to have a public viewing.
Right.
And we work with funeral homes to ensure that, public viewings can be done and done with dignity and done with honor to honor that person. And also to give that family, that last, goodbye, to see their loved one the way they remember them. And so that's a misconception as well. And if you think about too, in the African American community, some of the disparities that we've experienced in the healthcare field throughout the years, injustices that we've experienced, that has trickled down, by generation.
Yeah.
So do you remember the movie Soul Food?
I do.
Okay.
Big Mama, yeah.
You remember Big Mama? And y'all, Big Mama had diabetes.
She did.
She did.
Cost her leg.
And it cost her leg, which she did not want to get rid of. Okay. So it's a thing. You have this in your family where it's Big Mama's got diabetes, but she's not managing her diabetes well because of lack of knowledge and just whatever. Right. And then, you pass this on to your family. You pass these eating habits on to your family. And they don't understand the severity of diabetes or high blood pressure because it's not discussed in how everybody got. It's a joke. Everybody got diabetes. Yeah, everybody got high sugar. It's, the term is big back now. Everybody was a big back in your family.
And it's cool.
Yeah, and it's just cool. And we joke about it. But the reality is, okay, what we haven't done is we haven't discussed what this did to Big Mama.
Exactly.
We didn't discuss what this did to Uncle Tom. You know what I mean? We just know it happened, and we're repeating the same behaviors, but we don't know how to change it.
And it can be prevented.
And it can be prevented, you know? So a lot of my role comes with educating people. It's like, okay, these things can be prevented if you really take the opportunity and the time to understand and really tap into your health,
Right.
You know?
So since we're here, we talked a little bit about some of the misconceptions and the myths. We are all guilty. And when I say we, I mean me, of just some of those myths. We have doctors won't try as hard to save me if I'm an organ donor. I know we talked a little bit off camera, just like that was literally me. I had it on my license being an organ donor and was proud, thinking that, you know, I would save someone's life if it ever came to that. And then just having conversations, people like, girl, you better get that taken off your license because you know if something happened, they won't work as hard to save you. And I was like, oh, shoot. So my next birthday, when I had to go and get it, my license renewed, I had it taken off. Well, I requested it to have it taken off. When I got my license in the mail, it was still on there. And I think that kind of, it made me feel a little betrayed and proved the point. See? That's what I'm saying. You know, like I asked you to take it off, but no, you want my organ. So you have that. You have the, like, as you mentioned, organ donation being against the religion. My organs aren't usable because of my age and health, which I guess I could see it would make sense, you know, but that just may not be the case. And then also only rich people get transplants. So let's go ahead and talk about some of those myths.
Oh, okay. So there's a lot you said there. We have to address some of those myths, and some of them are probably facts in somebody's world somewhere.
Right.
We got to be able to acknowledge that in order to kind of change how we're, you know, viewing organ and tissue donation. First, I'll start with this. And I got my paper here because I want to get the statistics right. 60% of the national transplant waiting list are from multicultural communities. Okay. So that part is true, you know, and 27% of that is African Americans. So a lot of that goes back to what we were talking about with high blood pressure, diabetes, and just overall lifestyle, lack of education, all of those things. So that part is true. The part that is a myth is that people are waiting on us to die in order to retrieve our organs. The process of retrieving organs and the testing and the matching and all of that stuff is very intricate. Okay. And I think what has happened is media, movies, television has really sensationalized and perpetuated some of the myths. Oh, they're going to take me into the woods and they're going to take my organs. It's impossible. Okay. It's just, you know.
Sell them on the black market.
Black market, all of that stuff. I mean, learning about the process of how long tissues and organs last outside the body is very fast. You know, and even we're talking about some of the technology that, you know, we have acquired over the years. We're having lungs in boxes to preserve them for a certain amount of hours, or 14 hours or less, or having a kidney machine to preserve the kidney and pumping fluid so that it can get to its final destination. You know, this is a very intricate process we're talking about, and it's not a matter of pulling an organ out of somebody and slapping it in somebody else.
Or putting it in a bag.
Exactly. You know, we saw movies like Get Out.
Ice.
We saw movies like Get Out that really perpetuated, they want black organs. They, you know, these things. And I can tell you that there's been so much progression as it comes to like educating the African American community about donation, receiving, and giving. But I think those are some of the biggest misconceptions. And we have to look at the history of racism, how we've been treated as black Americans going all the way back to slavery, you know, and how healthcare wasn't accessible to us, or we were in hospitals and, you know, they weren't giving proper care to our babies, you know, or all of these various things that you can pull up over history. And then we talk about the oral history, you know, just things that are in our family that we've heard throughout the years. Oh, we don't do doctors. You know, we don't do doctors because doctors, you know, especially in the West Michigan area, we talk about certain hospitals. You know, oh, why don't go to that hospital? Because that hospital, you know, black people die in these hospitals. And these are things that, you know, these hospitals have heard. you know. But as a person who has received a transplant, and I'm Black, and I've worked with, you know, these hospitals in West Michigan, I see the dedication that people have to the Black community, and not only to the Black community, but just to the people who are waiting organs and tissues, you know, waiting for them. There's a lot of care that goes into it. You know, there's a lot of care on both ends. We give a lot of care to the families who have lost their loved one. We give a lot of care to the person who has received, you know, that gift of life. So there's a whole intricate process that is present to ensure that, you know, people, that there's some equity. You know what I mean? There's been some legislations and some laws that have been passed to kind of sweep some stuff out the way that were, you know, myths as it relate to kidney disease and wait times for African Americans that have been thrown out the window. So there are people advocating. There are people trying to get laws pushed in order for organ and tissue donation to be spread wide and to educate, you know? So yeah, I think that it really goes back to just the history and the experiences that we've had and the trauma that has been passed on.
So prior to you being on this journey, would you say that you had fallen victim to some of these myths and,
Sure.
you know, what I can't imagine the fear that
Sure.
may have, you know, been in you, just like, oh, wait, because I heard this, or, you know, they out there doing this, just like, and it comes from nowhere, you know what I'm saying? So can you tell us about that and how you pushed past that? And thank God that it all worked out and you were able to see, you know, the real process. And as you said, that they do care, and with the education that you received and all of that, like, just tell us a little bit about it.
I would say first it was educating myself. And when I first, you know, started to go into kidney failure and I knew I was going to have to go on dialysis, it's overwhelming. You know, there's nothing that can describe it, because you feel like you just got a death wish, you know, or a death sentence, I'm sorry. And you're like thinking through like, okay, what do I do? What do I, you know, all of these things. But it's important for you to have support around you, you know, for people to come to these appointments with you so that they're absorbing all of this information, and for you to educate yourself. And so I had to educate myself on a lot. I had to ask a lot of questions, you know, and there are some disparities where sometimes, you know, you may not get the information that you thought you should have gotten, you know, so a lot of self-advocacy went into it, you know. And so I always, when I talk to people who are dealing with, you know, organ issues or waiting a transplant, I'm like, get that information, ask a lot of questions, ask for those resources out there. So there were times where I was like afraid because of some of the myths that I'd heard. And we go back to experience, right? We go back to, you know, my sister had kidney disease, you know, and she passed, unfortunately, in her 30s, her early 30s. And so I went based off of her experience. And I went based off of other people that I had been seeing in you know, I was connected to that had been on dialysis and all these different things. And I automatically thought, well, maybe that's how it's going to end for me. And I think what helped pull me out of that was just the fact of, like I was saying earlier, educating and advocating for myself. I think the biggest thing that African Americans need to understand is that if you don't feel like you're getting proper health care, you have the option to go somewhere else. And I can't tell you how many times I've had conversations with people and they've said, you know, I don't like this and I don't like this with my doctor or whatever. And then I'm like, so what did you do about that? Or what are you going
second opinion?
Yeah. Are you going to go somewhere else? Or if you don't feel like, you know, you're receiving that proper care, then go ahead and talk to somebody else. And they're like, wow, I never thought about that. So a lot of it is just advocating and education, you know. And I feel like after advocating for myself and feeling like at one time where I wasn't getting the care I wanted and I needed, I switched, and I was surrounded by, you know, a team that knew I wanted to live. And I had to adhere to a lot of the transplant waiting list requirements. And that part is really hard, you know? And so I just encourage people who are waiting or dealing with organ failure or anything like that to, you know, make sure that they're taking care of themselves and following through. The restrictions and things can be very hard. And that's a lot of what I see in the African American community, is that it's like, no, I want to continue having my pop and
It's soul food.
eating my my soul
literally
food and my processed food and things like that, but not change my regimen or change the way that I'm thinking. You know, because it starts with your mind, you know, and then it manifests into your actions. And so that's the biggest thing for me. Like I had to educate and advocate. But then what do we do for the people that don't have access to be able to educate themselves,
right,
or maybe don't feel empowered enough to, you know, advocate for themselves? And so that's why we are here in these positions, and other organizations too, you know, like GRAAHI, to empower and to educate and to get into marginalized spaces and get into spaces where these conversations are not being had. I can't tell you how many times I have had conversations with people that had like completely unaware about organ and tissue donation, like unaware. I don't know. I mean, even years ago, I didn't even know what gift of life was.
Right.
I didn't know what gift of life was until I got on the transplant list. And we're trying to shift that where people just know it's a thing. You know, it's a thing. Gift of life is a thing. And we are, you know, honoring life, you know, through facilitating organ and tissue and eye donation. You see how I put that plug in there.
I know that's right.
But, you know, it's like we want to make that a known thing in West Michigan, but also in the state of Michigan, all over, you know, the nation.
And yeah, I think that's where it starts as well, because a lot of times, especially when you go through something and you have that experience, we forget that people just don't know. You know, and so I know that it can come across a certain way, like they're automatically rejecting it. So do you find yourself having to, when you go into these spaces, like go all the way down to ground zero and just be like, okay, nope, we need to just start with education, because, you know, people don't know what they don't know.
Yeah.
You know?
When you come in, you're already dealing with a traumatic life event. And so you go in with your defenses up, and you might go in with this concept of, you know, they don't care about us anyway. And so, you know, that can translate in so many ways as it pertains to you even maintaining your own health. You know, well, what is it? You know, they don't care about, you know, so, I mean, I guess I'll do that, or maybe I'll do that, you know. And so I find myself having conversations with people at that root level of just like, are you even on the donor registry? No. And that's how the conversation can start, just by having this position. Oh, what do you do? Gift of life, what is that? Oh, you know, gift of life is this. And are you on a donor registry? You know what, I am, but I have no idea what that means. You know, they asked me when I got my license, or, you know, now it's on your tax form, you know, where they will ask you. And people just don't understand what that means. And so just starting at that level, what can you donate? You know? And then you mentioned something about people being like, well, you don't want my organs because I've been through this, or I've you know,
old or anything.
We always encourage people not to rule themselves out, because even if a person cannot give an organ, there's possibility to give tissue.
Yeah.
Okay. So say, for instance, if a person does have other issues and, you know, they can't give an organ, or certain tissues are, you know, you can give a cornea. You know what I mean? And you change the life right there. Right. You know, and I don't know if we have these glasses that we give students to be able to see when your cornea is damaged, which cornea is basically like the lens over your eye that keeps, like, you know, is like a filter, basically keeps dust and everything out. You're basically like legally blind, you know, and we've had so many young people and adults who've had cornea injuries, you know, who needed a new cornea, you know, and maybe that one person was able to give that. So yeah, it's real intricate, Ashley. It really is. It really is. Yeah.
Okay, so this conversation has been, you know, a little heavy, you know, with all the myths and everything that have to be debunked and all of that. Yeah. So can you give us some positive sides of all of this?
Yeah. Okay. So in 2023, I actually got my kidney transplant. So I have some stats here from 2023, but this pertains to all organs. Okay. In 2023, more than 10,000 African Americans received transplants, and more than 3,000 were actually donors. In 2024, 533 organs were donated, a record-breaking 1,960 tissue donors, right? So we're seeing these numbers increase, and I really attribute that to mobilizing and getting out there and having these conversations and on platforms like this and getting into spaces and getting into schools and having conversations with teenagers and young people about this. You know, I don't remember having anybody talk to me about organ and tissue donation when I was a teenager.
We learned everything from the movies.
We learned everything from the movies or Grey's Anatomy.
Yep.
Or, you know, let's go back. Doogie Howser. Is it Doogie Howser? Doogie. Yeah, you know, that's when we were coming up.
Yep.
So you learned all of these things from television, but we didn't have people educating us. And so, you know, we need more education in our schools to talk to students about organs and the function of organs and taking care of your body and things like that. But also, what does it mean to be a donor? You know, when you go, I always ask this question. How many of you have been asked the question, do you want to be a donor when you go to get your driver's license? And all these people raise their hand. How many of you really know what that means? And like a few people really raise their hand, you know? So that shows you right there,
Right.
you know, there's not a lot of information or education there. So there is a lot of mobilizing that needs to take place in order to get the word out. But the numbers don't lie, you know? So to use the terminology and say African Americans are not getting organs at all would be a complete myth. You know, we are receiving them. If we can get more education out there, we can continue to see those numbers rise. Yeah.
So we're talking about mobilizing the community.
Yeah.
So like, where do we sign up? Is it just, you know, when we get our license or
Yeah.
just when we file our taxes, or how do we become advocates for the donation within the community, and how can we advocate for better education opportunities
Yeah.
at community based?
I would say for people to get connected with Gift of Life Michigan, to be a volunteer and to learn more. There's opportunities to learn more about it. If you just go to giftoflifemichigan.org, you can look at events that we have that can really give you some information on what it means to be an organ and tissue donor. And then also getting that information out there. What would be helpful is getting it more into the schools.
Yeah.
You know, so from my understanding, there's something at the legislation level to try to make it a requirement so students can be educated on this. Another way that we can mobilize is by talking to our family members about, you know, organ and tissue and eye donation. So if you go to giftoflifemichigan.org, or for short, you can just put GOLM.org and look up some information on there and educate yourself. Have these conversations at the dinner table, you know, and if you know some history in your family, ask questions, you know, and get that conversation going. And it doesn't mean you have to be an expert, you know, when it comes to, it is a very intricate process. But overall, like, let's start having the conversations around it.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
So thank you so much for joining us, Kenny.
Thank
Is
you for
there
having me.
anything else that you need to plug? What's going on over at Gift of Life?
All right. So if you go to our website, giftoflifemichigan.org or GOLM.org for short, you can check out on Tuesday, June 17th. You could just type in Check Your Heart Capital Rally. We're doing like a March of Honor, but we're also going to be at the Capitol in Lansing to mobilize and come together and say, like, we want some bills to be passed specifically around educating and making it a requirement to educate in high schools. There's going to be free bus transportation from Grand Rapids as well as from, I think, the Detroit area. So if you go on that website and just type that in, you can go on and register and get more information on that. And then also July 17th, we have an event called Donate Life at the Zoo. And that's just an opportunity to come together and to celebrate, you know, some of the people who have been donors and those who are recipients. We have free access to the zoo. We have an honor walk. For both events, there's an honor walk for people who have been donors, but also people we've lost to, you know, chronic illnesses that are due to, you know, organ failure. And so, so come on out July 17th. It's a free event for the zoo. We've got ice cream and treats for the kids, and it's going to be a good time. Yeah.
Thanks again for joining us, Kenny. And thank you all for joining us for another episode of Curated Conversations. We'll talk soon.